My name's Rusty Sitton. I'm the Redneck boat guy. I build two-cylinder racing outboard boats. I build the props to go on them, and we also sail a 33-foot catamaran named See Y'all Later. Hope you enjoy the channel. Hey, this is Rusty. We're back in the garage. Going to start on a prop series, something I'm real interested in, something I'm anxious to share information about. I'm going to start out, of course, with very basic information about props and how they work. A lot of you boat racers, of course, you got a lot of that down and everything, but speaking to a wider audience, I want to talk about pitch first thing. They talk about diameter and pitch, like if you're buying one for your bass boat or for whatever, you're looking at a pitch number, say it's a 17, a 19, a 20, a 30 pitch. What that means is, if you take this prop and it spins one rotation all the way through to where it's exactly one rotation, that number is the travel if there wasn't any slip from where it started to where it finished. So if it was a 10 pitch, it's going to move 10 inches. If it's a 20 pitch, it's going to move 20 inches if there was never any slip. So that's what prop pitch is. That's a very basic thing. Now there's a lot of different kind of props. There's power props, there's speed props. I'm primarily going to talk about racing, as we progress more and more into the prop business. But I am going to talk about overall first. I want to talk about diameter. Let's talk about diameter first, right? Well, the bigger diameter you got, the more water it's going to grab in each turn. I mean, that sounds simplistic. But what it is if you've got a real high horsepower engine, you're going to have to grab more water or it'll just spin the prop. So a bigger diameter for bigger horsepower. When you're turning the big old ship wheel, it's 14 foot in diameter at 900 RPMs, the tip speed becomes important. What happens there is, just like one of those airplanes. Have you ever seen an airplane getting ready to take off and he goes out there and tries his motor and tries the different, all of the different settings and making sure the motor's running right? Well, what you'll hear is a blading sound. You'll hear that prop sound really loud at one point. And what's happening right there is the tips start breaking the sound barrier. Now, when that happens, when they start breaking the sound barrier, that makes that tip inefficient. It's just splitting the air here and splitting the air here, and it's not touching the prop anymore. So how fast you're turning that prop has a whole lot to do with when you reach that sound barrier level. Now, in water, of course, is different than air. So it's much denser, but you still have that same issue. Woody Leon explained it to me one time about how tip speed, you have to keep it to a certain level or you lose power on the end of the blades. And all it is drag at that point. That's the very worst part, because it's harder to pull this than it would be in here, because just the mechanical advantage of leverage. So we run say a 6 3/4 inch to a 7 1/2 inch, 7 1/4 inch prop in our race boats. And a lot of our lower units, especially on the big motors, are 1-to-1 gear ratio. The prop is turning the same RPM as the engine. So we can't use a lot of diameter. In fact, it works better to have a little bit smaller diameter. The smaller the diameter, the faster you can turn it without coming into a problem. Now, in the smaller two-cylinder stuff like I run, the gear ratios are like 2 teeth, 3 teeth, up to 5 teeth off. And what I mean by that is, like on a Mercury Quicksilver, it's a 16-21 ratio. And what that means is the prop gear, our gear ratio in the lower unit is a 16-21. So that means that the engine turns 21 times. There's 21 teeth on the pinion gear, and there's 16 on the prop shaft. So it's turning slower than the power head. So it's 5 teeth off between 16 and 21. So that's a gear reduction. That's one of the highest gear reductions. I think a hot rod is a little bit more than that, but That's kind of the lowest gears that we run. And when you run a lower gear, you're going to need more blade area because you got more punch down on that prop. Plus, you can stand more tip speed. So blade area and blade diameter have a whole lot to do with the gear ratio you're running. So now that we've discussed diameter, let's talk about blade area. Mentioned it a little bit earlier. There's a certain blade area that works for different horsepowers or different gear ratios. And that's real important. Since you only have a one-speed unit there, you're not shifting gears. That prop's got to work from acceleration all the way through top speed. All right, well, we've discussed diameter and we've discussed tip speed. Now let's discuss pitch progression. You know, a pitch, we know about that, but a pitch progression from the front of the blade to the back of the blade on about 3/4 of the way out, or 2/3 of the way out on the prop is really the average pitch. On the Yamato, it starts out about 10.1 pitch here and ends up in the 12s, 12.2, 12.3, 12.5 on the back end. So you've got about 2.5 inches of pitch progression between here and here. And the reason you have to do that is for acceleration. If all you were running were top end, you would want 0 pitch progression, because that way you would want all of the blade at the exact pitch angle you need to run top end. But we don't do that. We run round course racing. Now, when I ran this boat as a straightaway, had almost no pitch progression from the leading edge to the trailing edge. The maximum amount of blade area was correct running on top end only. So that's important. I think the magic number on blade progression for round and round racing is about 2.5 inches of progression. You get over that, and the lower pitch blade area gets to where it's not working hardly at all once you get on top end. In fact, it can start hitting the back of the blade if you got too much pitch progression. Say you had 3 inches. This started out at 9, 10, 11, 12, and ended up at 12. So at one point when you're running and you're going toward that water, right, that water's going to start hitting the back of that blade. So you can't have that. Pitch progression is super important, and there's pitch progression up the blade, and there's also a pitch progression from the hub out to the tips. Just think about the speed that this part's running versus this part running. It's like a steering wheel on a car. If you had a little bitty steering wheel, you wouldn't have to move it much to turn 45 degrees. But if you had a big old bus steering wheel, you got to move it way around here and way around here. So it's the same way with diameter. The speed goes slower as you go toward the middle of the hub. So you've got pitch progression up the blade, and you've got pitch progression out the blade. Near the hub, a real important thing that we've discovered several years ago was that when the water goes around that lower unit, water's it's not compressible per se, but when it's divided by that lower unit, it speeds up, right? Within, say, that far of the hub, the water's rushing through a lot quicker than it is out here in its natural state. So you have to account for that as well. You have to have a lot more pitch in here, or water starts hitting the back of the blade again on top speed. So you've got to have enough down here on the front of the blade to accept the water when you're running in really, really high speeds. That's some of the things I found out. And, that when we're talking about basics as far as propellers go, that might be getting into a little bit more detail than I wanted to get to in this video. Pitch. But how do you measure pitch, right? How do you figure out what that is? Well, we've got a deal called a pitch gauge, and it's nothing more than an angle finder. But what you do is, this one was made by Rusty Bonnin, and basically what it is it's got an angle finder here that you can put on that blade, and it's got a number up here, right? Well, how do you know that number's right? Well, each pitch gauge is a little bit different. It's not going to be exactly the same. But on this one, this prop doesn't have a ton of pitch progression. It starts out at 11.5, and let's see where it goes to. and in the middle it's 12.2, and up here before the cup, yeah, it's quite a bit of progression on that blade. It's about 13.5. So let's see, it started out at what? Started about 11.5, 12.5, 13.5. So that's got 2 inches of pitch progression. And another thing to look at is if you're looking at a real short little blade, pitch progression needs to be less. This is a pretty long blade in here. So if you're talking about 2.5, or actually 2 inches of pitch progression versus 2.5 on that little blade, this blade is a lot more cupped than this blade. So the truer the pitch, the better the top end. But there's a lot to be talked about acceleration and how props work. This is a geared wheel, so the blades are a little bit bigger on it, a little bit bigger diameter. It's a little bit over 7-inch diameter. Now this was probably the best wheel I've ever owned, and we were racing down in Trinity, Texas one time, and was coming around the corner, and I heard the motor rev up, and it acted kind of funny, and I went straight into the bank, and I found out that I had lost a blade. So I'm gonna see about getting Craig Dewald to build me a new one of these. And what I like to do is record some of my better props and the props I'm working on by just taking some blue tape, right? And I'll put it on there. I'll take some blue tape, put it on there, and then I'll cut it off. I'll trim it to the exact size and pattern of that blade, and I'll keep that for historical purposes. And I write down on there the pitches at the tip and then at each interval as it goes in. And then I put the prop designation on those. So I keep those as a historical record of I've been building props, like I say, for about 40 years. Now, when I say I'm building props, I build props for us. You know, I'm not a commercial prop builder like Dewald or one of those guys. I work on my own stuff. And I'm not interested in building props for everybody. I really don't want to do that. And I was talking about, you know, in my intro, I say I build boats and props. I build boats for us, you know, for Team Texas. I'm not a producer. I looked at that often, and I think about, well, you know, I'm saying I build boats and I build props, but, you know, it's not for the market. It's just for us, just for Team Texas. And I don't want to go into business doing that. I did it a little bit with Jimmy Campisi and built some hydros and a couple of runabouts with him. And that was fun and everything, but I'm not interested in another job. I got plenty of that. I wanted to get this out there about just prop basics, the ideas of what makes a prop work, what pitch is, the information about diameter and progression. And with this video, that's probably all I really need to go through. Next video, we'll talk about what gives it transom lift or bow lift, or why you would even need bow lift or transom lift or both in a propeller. How to set it up for a different boat, how to choose a propeller for a different race. There's a lot of detailed information that I'll share with you later on as we get into the prop video. Now, I've built a lot of different props, and there's one right there. That is a remote control prop. I've got a little 4-foot tunnel boat that had a 3-horse motor that turned like 40,000 RPM. And this prop, it was 1-to-1. So this prop was turning 40,000 RPM. You could be running 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour down through the water. And you give it all the gas. It was a 12S electric. So it had a bunch of power. And you could be running 40 or 50 and gas it, and you could blow it over. Just with the sheer horsepower that stupid little thing had. But I built a bunch of these for when I was messing with RCs. My first prop that I ever built was a 30-pitch chopper for my Hydrostream. I had a Hydrostream vamp that ran forever. Started out with a 150-horse inline 6 on it, and went to a 200-horse Mariner V6. Run a river full of gasoline through that thing, and that's when I really started beating on props. I didn't know how to send them to anybody, or I was a poor kid back then, and I just started I got a hammer back on my daddy's anvil and started beating on stuff and found out kind of what worked. You know, that was the first adventure into that. And it was a big round-eared blade, and we'll talk about that too, about blade pattern, you know, and we'll talk about that in the more advanced videos later on. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little Racing Prop 101 video. Got a lot more information to share. We'll get into rake angle, all kind of different things in more detail coming up soon.